All right, James, we're just going to continue our conversation here for a second. This will be a solid intro. I jumped on and I was like, James, I'm so sorry. I'm 2 minutes late. I feel like I've been run over by a bus. I had an outpatient procedure yesterday. And James's reply was something like, not as young as you used to be, are you? And then you made a beautiful comment that I want you to repeat. You said something about the age range, because I'm 37 going on 38 here. Mm-hmm. So what were you saying around ages and entrepreneurship?
I'm an older man than you are, and I didn't start the entrepreneurial journey until I was well into my 40s. And quite frankly, I had already enjoy is a cautious word. I had already been down the traditional corporate route for many years. And a corporate route often doesn't embrace entrepreneurship. And so if you're able to be an entrepreneur when you're younger, surviving the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur, but nonetheless, when you're young, you can have sleepless nights. You can handle those a little bit better than the days when you get a little bit older and you realize, oh my gosh, I'm getting too tired, too old for this nonsense of the ups and downs of what entrepreneurial life can bring you. That being said, I wouldn't change what I'm doing for a second. It's just, it's a very different situation to be in when you're in your 30s dealing with the craziness of, is this going to work? Is it not going to work? Versus in your 40s versus 50s. And then throw kids and a family in the mix when you're like, well, if it doesn't work for me, I'll eat ramen. Well, if it doesn't work for me, my kids are going to eat ramen.
All of a sudden, the risk. Honestly, there's nothing more painful as a father than watching your child in pain in any way, shape, or form. I've decided.
When that pain is brought on by the parent who's like, I got a great business idea. Just means we got to mortgage the house a second time.
Yeah, I'll never forget. So I was running to the airport and we're literally like booking it down the jetway. Me, my wife, and I think she was 1.5, maybe 2. But she was one of those 1.5, 2-year-olds that could actually like talk. So like she was way more verbal than most kids are that age. And I will tell you what, when the plane door closed, as like probably we were 100 feet off when they closed it. And you know how they are, like they won't open that back up. I was actually shocked at how resilient that flight attendant was, or that like the lady at the desk. Like the 2-year-old is literally saying the plane, like pointing at the plane, wanting to go. And she's like, no, sorry, like we've closed the door. And I'm looking at this kid like, oh my gosh, nothing could be more painful than this moment. And so I'm thinking now, you're right. Like the more you involve family into the mix and kind of push forward with this, the stakes get higher the older you get, I think.
It is hard to convince your family that your dream is their dream.
I've heard people talk about their wives as their COO. Like, hold on, let me go talk to my COO about that. Or let me go ask my partner. This is actually pretty true of those jumping into kind of a fractional journey as well. Like they've been working in corporate forever and they're like, nah, I'm going to go be a fractional head of product or whatever.
Yeah.
I've heard that a lot. I wonder what my board of directors would be my kids or something like that. Like, let me go see if they're willing to buy off on my dream and invest the emotional capital that's going to take to take this thing off. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot to be said for people who grow up in an entrepreneurial household. That they understand that's just part of the way of doing things. And I look at my kids who have known no other way but dad working from home, building businesses, coming up with crazy ideas that involves him talking to various people all over the world at every given week. And for them, it seems normal. Like, well, when I build my first business, when I have my own business, I can tell you those are not conversations I grew up with in my household when I was a kid. So
yeah. So on that note, my wife actually, so she grew up in a household where her dad worked for Lockheed Martin, literally a rocket scientist, basically. Yep. And one of the most stable, I mean, like they're not going anywhere kind of jobs, right? And so when she married me and I told her like, yeah, I'm going to go make $1 million and build my own thing. She was like, okay. And then like we continued to talk through that and the journey continued. And I knew I had hit a milestone when this is after we had now owned our 3rd house. So we bought our first house and then got the crazy opportunity to move across the country to Georgia to go hang out with Brandon Checketts. Yes. Then we bought our 3rd house back here in Utah. And we'd been here for about a year and a half, and what we had taken the money that we were moving around, and we'd finally gotten a little bit of cash in there. And she was like, I think it might be time to go get another rental property. And I was like, touchdown. Like, I could not believe that my wife, who had come from a background where she didn't grow up with that entrepreneurship. In fact, it was quite the opposite. They had some entrepreneur in their family that didn't go so well. And so there was kind of a, we don't really do that kind of vibe. And she's come a long way. And honestly, I couldn't have done it without her at all. I'm sure you feel the same way about your COO and board of directors.
Yes, my wife and COO and banker and CFO and director of recruiting. She does all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Love it. Well, actually, on that note, does she actually do like the recruiting and all of that? Like that's okay. All right. But recruiting in terms of new kids and all of the other things.
The reality is when you have a corporate job, someone else defines what your job's going to be. Someone else has already figured out there is a role here for someone to come in and do XYZ responsibilities. And then when you become an entrepreneur, first of all, you have to figure out what are the responsibilities that need to be accomplished? How do we parcel those out into different types of people's roles? And oh, by the way, what if things change? Because as a company, what you do today and what you do next month, what you do next year are likely going to evolve. Not at a company like Lockheed Martin, where you do this job and next year you're doing the same job. You just might have a little bit more responsibility. And again, there's nothing wrong with being in a corporate path. It's just
Agreed.
a very different mentality, very different types of stress than what you deal with as an entrepreneur. And quite frankly, I like having a stable household. I like having stable income. I like having I like to reduce the unnecessary variability, because work already has more variability being an entrepreneur than it would ever have if I was in a corporate life.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have a stable family life, you don't have to worry about that side of your life. And lo and behold, guess what? Family life is never as stable as it could be. But if you can reduce the fluctuations because you get along well with your wife, things are working well at home with the kids,
mm-hmm.
You have a house that you like living in, all this kind of stuff, it makes it a lot easier for you to say, okay, when I take my brain and I focus it on business problems are going to be primarily figuring out how do I grow this new idea that I have versus, oh my gosh, how do we pay for this, or someone's sick or what have you. But at the end of the day, you need to have some stability on parts of your life to be able to be an entrepreneur. Otherwise, everything's in flux. And then you say, oh my gosh, well, I can either put time into the business or I can put time into my family. I can put time into stabilizing the situation at home. It's like, you need to be able to focus on both, and you need to be able to know that there's stability on at least one front. And if you're successful as an entrepreneur, you may end up actually getting to a point where you've got reasonable stability on the entrepreneurial front too, which is a glorious moment.
Mm-hmm. So any tips, tricks, or hacks, thoughts around how to create some stability on one front while the other one's going crazy? What have you done to make sure? Because I mean, you took an entrepreneurial leap and literally left corporate to go do that side of things. What sorts of things did you do as you rode the roller coaster to try to find stability on one side or the other?
I had been at Amazon for a number of years, and we can get into why I left, but I recognized that I needed to do something where I had more control over what I did day to day. And there wasn't a shortage of opportunity for me to do consulting work with some of the types of brands that I had supported when I had been on the corporate side at Amazon. And so to think that I had a clear path of how I was going to do what I needed to do on the entrepreneurial side, that would be comical to think that I actually knew exactly how it was going to work out. But I knew that there was enough there that I could sort of piece it together while I figured it out. We use this expression, you got to act big until you are big. Well, I didn't even know what that meant. I just knew that there's certain financial responsibilities of running a household. And I knew that I had enough client opportunity to make that work. But it wasn't an infinite runway. It was like, okay, we need to figure this out in the next 9 to 12 months. And creating stability, yes, I had a few clients that helped to pay the bills, but I needed more stability than that. And that's actually when I made the decision to partner with someone else who was also an entrepreneur. And the gentleman who became my business partner, two of us flailing, trying to figure out our way through it, actually turned out to be better than each of us having to do it independently. What is really challenging as an entrepreneur, I think that the single biggest challenge for me is that stage of my life where I was trying to figure it out by myself. And there wasn't really somebody to throw ideas around with and say, hold on a minute. Do you have a different perspective? Can we get to a more common sense realization of how we might be able to realize this dream? And when you have a business partner who can see things that you don't see and is strong at things that you're not strong at, and vice versa, you can support that business partner in ways that he or she can't otherwise do himself or herself. You can move very quickly in terms of, wait a minute, let's try this out. And that makes logical sense on many fronts versus, I don't know, I woke up this morning, I had a bad night's sleep. I'm going to come up with some cockamamie idea and try to do it without somebody saying, hold on a minute, what are you thinking? That's ridiculous. So I think the entrepreneurial journey, when you have smart people around you, but also smart people who are your business partners, who you look to and say, listen, we are in this together. I'm not just defining your job and you're going to work for me, but we're actually going to be in this together. We're going to reap the rewards together, but we're also going to suffer through the pains together. And then when, because of course we're optimistic, when we work this out and it's a big success, then we will share in the benefits. I've seen people who go into business with each other who don't really understand how to work with each other. And then they end up having some kind of success. And then there's a big fight because they don't really appreciate what each of them brings to the table. I was very fortunate to have a business partner where we clearly understood who was good at doing what. And we were comfortable with the fact that the other guy did this and the other guy did that. And we needed all of those skills to be brought to the table. But at the same time, we needed to be able to bounce ideas off each other and validate that we weren't some pie in the sky dreamer, but actually somebody that we had some form of reality in terms of our objectives.
Yeah. So the first time we met, actually, you recruited a man that I respect a ton. You recruited Michael Gerber to be the keynote speaker at Prosper. That was the first time we met, was like literally right after I had listened to him talk a little bit about that. And his book, The E-Myth, talks about how one of the fastest sinking ships is a partnership when you don't define the roles. Right? Yep. Like the first thing he says is go define all the roles and then you and your partner decide, okay, I'm taking this role, you're taking that role, like start with the end in mind, right? We're naming off books like crazy here. But really that idea of separating those two, could not agree more with you. That it's about finding individuals who complement you and finding what's there. I mean, the point of this podcast is monetizing your mental capital. This is how we take these Amazon sellers are actually really good at tangible products. Yes. And like, hey, I've got pens and I want to go sell those online. They can do that. We're talking about creating alternate revenue streams from intangible products, right? Whether that's writing a book or creating a course or productizing a service or setting up a SaaS business. All of those intangibles are kind of what the podcast is focused around. And I love you've focused on the roadblock of alone, right? Like there is a major roadblock when you're on your own and you don't have someone to lean on and say, whoa, was that really a good idea? Right? And sometimes I've found that both sides of the partnership, for me, I focus a lot on kind of integrator versus visionary. Was that similar for you in terms of the partnership and kind of the traction rocket fuel idea of like having two people that are opposites working together? Or were you both similar and you just kind of leaned into those roles? Or what did that look like for you?
I think the word visionary is overused. I think we both had a shared goal around what we ultimately wanted to accomplish. We weren't quite sure what the journey was to get there, but we both knew that we wanted to build an agency that would eventually have a bunch of clients and maybe we get to be big enough that somebody would buy it. Okay, that sounds great. Neither of us had ever done that, and neither of us really knew what the finish line would ultimately look like, but we knew that we needed to build something big enough that it wasn't just on the two of us to be the consultants that solved every problem. We needed to have infrastructure, process that we could hire and train and retain people. We needed to be in a position where we could solve problems through our employees rather than everything escalating back up to us. Admittedly, it's baking a cake for the first time. You have no recipe and you have nobody around you who's ever baked a cake. And you're trying to figure it out together, but you both can apply a certain level of common sense to, okay, there are some things we know we need, some ingredients we know we need. We may have missed a few ingredients, and that's okay. We'll figure it out the second cake we bake, but we've got to work on this together versus, I mean, when you have multiple sets of inputs, it should go faster. You may also have more variability in terms of somebody says, well, I think we need to add nutmeg to this cake. And you're like, I like nutmeg, but I don't think it goes into every cake. Let's think this through. But the reality is the journey to the objective is never completely clear. And even if you're building your second business or your third business, there is no such thing as rinse and repeat. You have a clearer view of what needs to happen in order to accomplish certain things, but you're still going to bump into the walls along the way. And it's good to have other people with you who can help you react, but also console as you go down this path and discover, oh man, how did we make this misstep? Okay, let's think about that. So I appreciate having a business partner with whom we can digest and think through why something's working, why something's not working. And often the root causes of either of those types of issues isn't quite so obvious. And so it's good to have a couple sets of eyes looking at things and digesting and thinking things through.
Yeah.
In many ways, I feel like being a entrepreneur, you sit down and you initially have this vision, you have this discussion. You're like, we want to build this thing. Okay. All right. And we think we have a journey, a path that we're going to take to go down that path. Okay, great. And then on a day-to-day basis, as you pursue that goal, it's a little bit like being blindfolded and you just bang into the walls as you're going down the hall towards this light at the end of the tunnel. And every so often you stop and you take that blindfold off and you look at each other and go, what are we doing wrong here? Because we're banging into a lot of walls.
That's moment of reflection.
But there's lots of moments of reflection. And one of the things I value the absolute most, and I wish everybody coming out of business school, everyone with this, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, I think it's a wonderful situation to be aligned with a business partner where you're learning together, you're sharing ideas, and you're thinking through, how do we make this work? And it's not just, I myself will solve all problems. No, you won't. You absolutely won't. You need people with different perspectives who are also thinking things through. And quite frankly, when you get to the point where you can have 6 or 8 calls a day with each other, just little tiny ideas, just validating back and forth. Some of those little ideas you may discover are big ideas or big problems that have not been resolved. And having that safety blanket of a business partner who you can bounce ideas off of and know that they're going to bounce ideas back off of you, it certainly creates more reassurance that as difficult as this path is, I think we're going in the right kind of direction. It may not be perfect, but we're heading kind of in the right direction. Versus, I only have perspective on these things, and I'm going to try to solve this myself. And I'm going to wake up one day and realize, oh my gosh, I just went over the cliff and I didn't see it coming because I don't have that perspective to be able to measure these things.
So how do you identify individuals who would be in a different enough perspective? So like, were you looking at some of your weaknesses and looking and saying that he's got my strengths? Or, I mean, I'm sure you were evaluating him as you maybe fell into that. I find that business partners often find you or you find them naturally as you continue through your journey. So you're not like posting and saying, I'm looking for someone who's my opposite.
But I need a drummer for the band.
Yeah. What were the questions that you were asking yourself to identify and realize, okay, yeah, I actually do have the right kind of person sitting opposite me in this entrepreneurial journey?
So one of the most important things my parents ever taught me was surround yourself with people that have similar values to you. And so start with the values. Does this person have the same ethical approach? Does this person value the same types of really important core things around what it means to be successful? Does this person operate in a way in terms of how they treat other people? Is that aligned with the way you think about the world? And if you meet people like that, then it's easy to start feeling comfortable around them to share ideas. And I didn't go looking for a business partner. We found each other sort of by accident. And when we realized that we had a lot in common on some of those underlying values, the opportunity to say, listen, we should be in a band together. We should do this. We should figure out, like, I don't know what we're going to build, but this is fun. Like this interaction that we're having back and forth, I feel like we can actually help each other a lot. And then we figured out, okay, wait a minute. There's some things you're really good at doing that I don't know how to do, and vice versa. Well, how could we turn that into something? Oh, okay. Well, we could do something. There was never a point in my career as an entrepreneur where I said, what I need to do is surround myself with someone with this particular skill. And oh, by the way, they better be aligned with me in terms of the values and underlying work ethic and so on. it started first and foremost with create people that you would like to spend more time with, find people with whom you like to spend more time because you appreciate them for the way that they accomplish work, for the way that they prioritize what's important and what's not. And again, you're going to meet lots of people who you may say, oh, that person's really smart, but I could never work with them. Okay, so great.
If we were to like sum that up, really what you're identifying is someone who has similar values and also complements you from a skill set standpoint or an aptitude standpoint. For me, I tend to be way more of the sales guy, run around, raw, be out there in front. And I found that I complement best with people who are more of like I'm going to get crap done. So I'm constantly thinking about like, how are we going to change the world 10 years from now? I need somebody who's like, how are we going to change the world next week? I found that's kind of my complement. And I found if I can find people who are like that, who have those same values, that's where it goes. So here's the question. How do you create, you mentioned creating them and then you changed your mind and said, no, finding them. How do you create opportunities that create an opportunity to find? So what would you say is, what do you do to begin that search, so to speak?
So there are smart people all around you. You go to conferences, you hear somebody speak, you hear a webinar, and you're like, wow, that person, what they say, it's not so much what they say, but how they say what they say that really resonates with me. I'd like to talk to this person. And so I'm a internally looking person. I am an introvert. And the opportunity to go talk to a bunch of random people in a big room, that's not my area of comfort. But I do like the opportunity to have lots of one-on-one conversations with people and to engage with folks, to sort of figure out who they are and see if we have common interests, but more importantly, common values. And so when I left Amazon, all of a sudden I went from having a whole bunch of colleagues up and down the hall to I didn't have anybody. I could call a few people here and there that I knew, but they were not necessarily they weren't in my company, so to speak. And so I had to proactively go to conferences. I had to proactively listen to webinars and podcasts, stuff that I had never, ever done when I was in Amazon. I mean, let's be honest, 10 years ago, if you had a podcast, that was a big deal. What? Yeah. You have a podcast? Everybody has a podcast now. Everybody has a webinar. Nothing wrong with that.
We're on one.
We are. Oh, yeah. But the reality is you've got to engage with folks in whatever conditions you're comfortable with. So if you like big rooms of people and work in the room, fine, do that. If you like having a whole series of conversations one-on-one with people when you're sitting at a lunch table, then do that. But the important thing is you need to get out there and you need to talk to folks. Because even if you don't end up working with someone, I have been blessed with meeting so many interesting people who are 1 degree of separation away from the people that I do want to meet. And I didn't know they knew them. And I didn't know that they knew people like the people that I wanted to meet. And getting comfortable giving of yourself to have some of that initial chit chat and kind of figure out what people are all about and what interests them. And again, this fundamental question around what their underlying value system is around what's important to them in life and how they accomplish things. I didn't have a magical path for doing this. But if I look back to like the 22, 25-year-old version of myself, the thing I would have said to myself is do a better job of networking and getting out and talking to people. And that may be scary for certain personalities, but go do it anyways, because it turns out my single biggest value now as a guy in his 50s who's already exited a few companies, my single biggest value is the network that I built. It's the people that I have met. And then I've met people through them and I've met other people through them. And all of a sudden, a bunch of people that you wouldn't expect that you would know, but they're also looking for interesting people that they want to meet. And I can't be interesting to somebody on all fronts, but there may be things that I know that are interesting to certain folks and vice versa. I want to meet what other people are interested in doing and things that they know how to do that I'll never know how to do. Yep. So I would definitely tell my 25-year-old version of myself, get out there and talk to people. Use LinkedIn. When I was 25, LinkedIn didn't exist. But for anybody today who's even a college student, ask yourself the question, how do I use LinkedIn to start building connections? And they don't have to be strong connections, but Connections with the types of people who either are going to put content in front of me that I should be interested in reading, or are the kinds of people that I want to be able to reach out to and say, hey, listen, do you know a guy who knows how to do this kind of thing or is skilled in this area? Oh, yeah, I do know people like that. A 25-year-old version of myself, I'm like, I don't know a CEO.
I love what you're saying there, and to gather in several of these ideas. So we talked about LinkedIn, and I think LinkedIn goes from connecting to people to commenting to searching for mentors to just being involved in the conversation, looking at hashtags and actually identifying who's talking about this the most. You'll be shocked at how willing people are to look at you. So if you're monetizing mental capital, or you're an Amazon seller and you're looking to figure out how to go monetize that mental capital, go find somebody who's built a productized service or a SaaS product or whatever it is that you're kind of leaning towards in where you're looking to monetize, or you're just looking to figure out what ideas could I monetize? Go find other sellers, other smart people who have already done that, and just start to be part of the conversation. And being part of the conversation could look like you just asking questions, right? It doesn't need to be you contributing a ton to the conversation. A thoughtful question is actually probably just as powerful in a conversation as a very well thought out comment that adds to the discussion. So don't feel like you can't bring anything to the discussion because you don't know anything about it. Your question is valuable. So I would say LinkedIn, you talked about going to conferences. Another one that I'd throw out there is masterminds, find networking groups like $1 Million Seller Group or whatever other group that's out there. Find these like-minded individuals that are there, and you can begin to shape some of that journey. Another thing I just want to throw out, I listened to a podcast. This is a recommendation from a coach of mine to go over to Tim Ferriss's blog. And he has this amazing presentation he gave at South by Southwest about networking. And he was like, do this and everything else follows. And his advice in that podcast episode, you can Google it, Tim Ferriss, how to build amazing networks and where to look at that. I'll put the link in the comments here of the episode. But if you look at that episode, he literally says it's about genuine connection. You never know who is going to know. 7 Degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? You never know who James Thompson's going to know, who so-and-so is going to know, who so-and-so is going to know. Build genuine connection. James, the first time you and I met, the reason we connected any more than just, hey, you're a vendor who happened to have a booth at my conference, was that I pointed out a problem that was going on inside the conference with technology. And just out of sheer, hey, dude, you may want to take a look at this. I found a security hole, and you were like, whoa, okay, yeah, we should talk more about that. That was the beginning of our journey, was just a value added conversation as we dig into that. So couldn't agree more with you on being out there and connecting genuinely with people.
I want to remark on something you said in terms of asking questions. The other thing I would tell my 25-year-old version of myself is learn how to ask good questions versus learn how to say smart things. Because it turns out when you're young, you go to class, you memorize a bunch of stuff, and then you have an opportunity to engage in conversation, and you work so hard just to say stuff that makes you sound smart, like, oh, I happen to have read this and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, good for you. But it turns out if you want to go far in the world, the skill that you need to develop more than anything else is listen and then ask the one question that needs to be asked. And when you get really good at asking those questions, everybody in the room, or whether it's a large group conversation or it's a one-on-one conversation, if you ask the right question, people know you're engaged and people know that you know what matters. And so that's the skill that I wish I had when I was in my 20s and 30s, was learn how to ask the right question. What's really funny for me is when I think back to all the weekly business reviews that I used to go to when I was at Amazon, and there would be all these senior executives in the room. The senior executives never spent time saying smart stuff. They always asked the one right question. And everybody in the room would go, oh, yeah, right.
That was a good question.
Yeah. Well, it turns out if you ask the right question, then you can shift the conversation towards where it needs to be headed. Whereas if you say some smart ass thing like, blah, 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 look how smart I am, blah, 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 everyone just looks at you and is like, I feel sorry for you. You're a loser, man. Like, who cares? just like, whatever. I don't want to spend time around a guy who wants to show off how smart he is.
It's about the intent too, right? There's another book that I love, and I'm not trying to sound smart here, so here I go. It's called Leadership and Self-Deception, and it's by the Arbinger Institute, and it talks about our way of being. And if you treat other people like people and you see their needs and wants as just as valuable as your own, if you see them as an object, people get that. They're like, oh my gosh, you are like, we immediately can tell, am I being treated like crap or am I being treated by like another human being? And so I think what you're saying in those questions, it's about the intent behind them, right? Like if I'm trying, sometimes you can ask a question and still look like a dick, right? Like if you're out there in the world, but if you're asking that one right question and you're doing it in a way to further everyone's knowledge and understanding of where that's going, you're absolutely going to be seen as someone who's adding that. Whereas if you're trying to put it out there and look smarter and this is about me, people pick up on that immediately.
Yep.
And so I agree, asking the right question and then treating people like people is a key to opening up genuine relationships and huge opportunities. Oh, okay. So shifting the conversation just a little bit here.
Sure.
You're over at Amazon and you decided to leave. As you took that shift and that journey, what are the main reasons behind shifting and digging into leaving the corporate stable to diving into the entrepreneurial?
I had professional reasons to leave and I had personal reasons to leave. On the personal front, I had one child and I rarely saw my one son and my wife. We were expecting a second child, and I had been told by other ex-Amazonians that they really struggled with being able to have any meaningful family life while also investing the time necessary for Amazon. So I had a long series of conversations with my wife, and we talked it through. And when you're in a fast moving tech company, Amazon is hardly the unusual case. The reality is there's no finish line. You're just working on the next project. And so you've got to ask yourself, what is the point of this? Is the point of this to make a bunch of money? Is it to have security? Is it to work on fun projects? Like, what are you trying to get out of this corporate life? And what I realized that no matter what I did at Amazon, I wasn't going to be able to also have some meaningful amount of time in my life to spend with my family. I realized it wasn't going to work for me long term. And there are people that make it work, but for me, it wasn't working. So I knew that I had to leave Amazon in order to also have some flexibility, enough flexibility to see my wife and kids. That being said, when I was in my last role at Amazon, I was running a group called Amazon Services, which did all the self-service sign-up of third-party sellers. And I would talk to hundreds of sellers every single month, companies that had just started the journey of deciding to be an online seller. And I realized that for a lot of them, they went into this with completely unrealistic expectations, either about what Amazon was going to do for them or how easy it was going to be for them to make a bunch of money. And admittedly, some of these folks probably should never have been, I'm going to use the small e entrepreneur, but few of them should have gotten into the business of being sellers themselves. But even the ones that kind of understood that there was certain types of risks involved in being a seller on a massive platform, it resonated with me that a lot of them were getting into this for the wrong reasons, and there was no incentive for Amazon to stop them. And so you have this situation where we were signing up tens of thousands of sellers every month to come to the platform. Some of them would work out, some of them wouldn't. And while my job is not to save everybody, not at all, I do believe I have a responsibility to help ensure that sellers make better decisions around whether entrepreneurs make better decisions around whether to pursue becoming a seller on Amazon. And so I saw myself being in a position where I could do more from an educational perspective, being outside of Amazon to provide a balanced perspective on here's what's good about Amazon platform, and here's what you can expect, and here's what you can't expect. And unless you have a way to make up the deficit in terms of the things that you're also going to need to be successful on Amazon, every entrepreneur, before they spend $10,000 of their savings buying that first batch of inventory, ask yourself the question, like, what is it I'm up against here?
Yeah.
What do I need to know? What's the discipline I need to put in place, the operational processes? And by the way, even if I do all of that right, where are the landmines that I could step on and it would blow up my whole business?
So it feels like you had a need. You saw this massive hole out there of people where like somebody needs to guide these people. And is that what latched on and you decided you were going to start an agency? Was that the need you saw in the market that you were like, I'm going to go out there and help there?
So I never went into this with the idea that I was going to help lots and lots of people all at once, but rather that there were still enough people out there who were early enough on in the journey that I could be meaningfully helpful to them so that the missteps they made were small missteps rather than walking off the cliff, which, when I look at the number of sellers who in their first year on Amazon were failing, it's pretty staggeringly high. And I believe a huge percent of that could have been completely avoided if we prevented them from getting into becoming sellers in the first place, because they really had no business being there in the first place. Again, when I say they had no business, I mean they weren't prepared for the challenges of being a seller on a highly competitive marketplace.
Right. So you identified this major need. So we're talking about monetizing mental capital, right? You recognize I have some of this mental capital because I've been trained. I've seen a lot of what not to do. I know where to go about that. And it sounds like you made the leap. You decided to, you know what, I'm gonna shift away, partly for my family, partly for other reasons. I'm gonna do the consulting thing for a while. Where in the journey did you find your partner?
A little over a year in. We happened to meet at a conference and we very much hit it off, and finding a business partner is like dating. And we had a bunch of meetings. I went to see him in his office and we had various other conversations for months and months. And then we realized that actually, you know what, we actually have some of the very same objectives. And while we're not trying to accomplish it the same way, it turns out we probably should think about working together. You date your girlfriend for a while and you say, you know what, this is really working out. We should think about whether we want to do this long term. It was kind of the same thing with my business partner. We said, maybe we should do some projects together. We're helping each other on projects, but maybe we should actually do shared projects together and see where this goes. And it didn't take long before we're like, you know what, let's just call ourselves an agency and put one roof over our head and move forward. So,
and you just summed up the journey of finding a partner and compared it to dating in such a beautiful way. Like we could probably spend another hour comparing dating to partner finding in that journey, because it is so similar. And I've found that pattern as I've found those like-minded individuals who share the values, who complement my skill set, who we naturally work well together. I've got like probably 6 or 7 people who I literally will identify, consider, I'm like subconsciously looking for opportunities for us to do something together. Because I know how fun it has been to work on the few projects that we've worked on, and I'm looking for opportunities to build with them on something else. It's almost like I'm not looking for new ideas, I'm looking for new partners, and then the ideas happen to match the partner. So it's very interesting as you talk about like where this goes, and I'm kind of comparing it to my journey and seeing what that looks like. James, this is amazing. I love where we've gone talking about partners and the roadblocks that have come with that. I have one more question to ask you. You mentioned, hey, if I could call my 25-year-old self, and was 25-year-old self, was he working at Amazon at that point? Is that where he was at?
No, I was 20. I was a management consultant in my 20s.
Okay.
And I was solving problems for clients. Well, okay. It definitely, again, someone else had defined what the role was that I was responsible for. And the box that I was playing in, that sandbox was very clearly defined. And my job was to do the best that I could do within that sandbox. And at no point did I say, you know what, I want to make this sandbox bigger, or I want to go play in a different sandbox. I said, this sandbox, I have so much that I can do in the sandbox.
Yeah.
And then you get to your 30s and you're like, you know what, I can do more than what's in this sandbox. Let me have something else to go do. And then I went from management consulting to more of a traditional corporate life. But again, every corporate role I've ever been in, except at Amazon.
It's all inside a box.
It was all within a box that was clearly defined. At Amazon, the sandbox can be changed. And in fact, the peculiarities of working at Amazon is that you can go grab someone else's sandbox, even when they're watching. And you're like, you know what? I'm going to become the lead of this project. And people are like, what? You're like, yep, I wrote a 6-pager and I have pitched it to the executives and they've said, okay, James, this is good. You should go run this. Meanwhile, the other group is like, wasn't that our job? Like, well, you didn't move fast enough. I mean, there was a lot of land grabbing going on back and forth every day at Amazon, which is that definitely keeps you on your toes, but also makes you realize if you're looking at little problems and little solutions and someone comes along and says, your problem is just part of a bigger problem, and I'm going to solve the bigger problem, people had their projects trumped all the time. Again, that's not a mentality that I faced in any other organization, but it creates a peculiar culture around don't try to solve little problems.
Interesting.
Because if they're really little problems, nobody cares. And someone else is going to figure out how to solve bigger problems and get the resources available to go solve bigger problems.
That is a huge piece of advice for sellers that are looking to monetize mental capital. Don't solve little problems. Like if you're looking at mental capital, you're looking at the skills you have, a SaaS product that you want to build, course that you want to build. Don't build a product or a course around a little problem and a big problem to solve that you can kind of look at what's there. And I think that's fascinating to kind of consider some of those pieces. So if you could make a phone call back to that guy before he took the entrepreneurial leap,
sure.
You mentioned I would tell him to ask better questions. And you actually that's a question we asked during the podcast. Normally, you basically naturally said, that's what I would have told him. Is there anything else that's coming to mind as you consider this younger version of yourself beyond just ask better questions? Any other?
Well, we talked a little bit about spend more time networking. And what that means is don't invite every VP out for lunch, but find excuses to get to understand more about what it means to be a VP, what it means to have more and more uncertainty in your role and more responsibility about defining the roles of other people. Figure out what that means. And the first few roles I had coming out of grad school, people always said, well, you need to do the job of the next level before you get promoted. I really had no clue what that meant. Just a second, please.
You're good.
Sorry. Figuring out how do you talk to people even one or two levels above you and figure out, well, as they made that journey from where I am to where they are now, what do they wish they had done differently? Or what seemed to work well for them? Some of that may be very company-specific culture, and some of it may be people doing really smart things where you realize, oh, yeah, I totally should have done that. I remember when I was in business school, I would look around and I would see what other classmates were doing to try to get summer internships. And it was obvious, the 3 or 4 people who not only did we know the best internships, but just the way that they made sure that they networked into organizations and had conversations with people. You're like, how did you get to those people? Well, it was always slow and steady. They talked to one person. That person would say, you should talk to this person and I'll make you an introduction. And you should talk to this person. Before they're talking to people that the lowly MBA student, you say, that's not possible for me to get in front of that person. But being back to what you said earlier, being authentic and being who you are and asking the right questions and demonstrating a real interest for the right reasons, not the, hey, I need a summer internship. Can you throw one my way? But rather, I've learned about a bunch of things about the way your company does stuff. And I don't understand, why do you do it this way and not that way? Well, if you ask certain questions, people say, well, gosh, why do we do it that way? That's really interesting. You asked that question. We should talk about that. And now you're the smart guy in the room for asking the smart question. And people say, maybe it's worth throwing a project your way for you to come in and be a summer intern and figure out how to look at this problem from a very different perspective.
Yeah, you asking all those right questions could actually give me more perspective, and that's of value. So going back to if you can learn to ask the right questions, you'll get farther in that whole journey. I love that. I love that. Okay. So for the last part of the podcast here, James, I'm going to throw this at you. I'm going to give you 60 seconds. You've just stepped into an elevator and the individual mentions that they're an 8-figure seller. And we're just going to mime out that conversation. So whatever questions you would want to ask or things you'd want to throw out in terms of them being interested in your current ventures or whichever one you want to decide you want to throw out there. And then right after that, we're going to talk about any tips, tricks, hacks, books, or apps that you've found that are like, wow, this has changed my life as far as 2023 is concerned. I really liked this author or whichever one. So the listeners are going to listen around for that. So here's the 60 seconds. You've just stepped into that elevator and I am going to time you. I'm going to do like a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So ready, set, go.
I'm happy to hear you're finding success selling on Amazon. What have been your biggest challenges scaling the business?
Oh man, the challenges never seem to end.
How did you get to a point where you realized that you could scale this and that the product that you had early success with might be interesting to a much larger group of people?
I mean, I had no idea when you combine a rubber check-in with a pen that people would get so excited about it. I mean, eight figures on something like that's just insane.
What do you do today to figure out where you're still off point with what your customers actually want to do and what they actually want to see? How do you experiment? How do you ensure that your organization is excited about doing experimenting, even though half of it's going to result in failures?
I mean, that's probably one of our biggest challenges, to be honest.
To me, that's interesting. Like, I would love to hear more about that. I'd love to work through some of those ideas and see if there's some things that we can do to help you become an even bigger seller. Because quite frankly, selling a lot today is just a point in time. And to continue to be successful, you have to continue to innovate. And that's really hard to do.
Beautiful. I love that. So it sounds like if you were teased and interested to understand more about how to solve that problem, James is your man. James, tips, tricks, hacks, or books. And by the way, I love that you didn't really even pitch there. You just asked questions, which is a very interesting, I mean, talking about connecting genuinely, you lived true to what you said earlier in the podcast. So tips, tricks, hacks, or books, apps that have changed your life. You asked me about a book,
and there's one book here. I don't know if you can see this here. Oh, shoot, it's hard to see. It's called The Go-Giver. The idea is we all set out to be go-getters. Go get it. Go figure out how to climb the corporate ladder. But the go-giver, the concept is give of yourself and be willing to help people all throughout the journey. It doesn't mean you stop what you're doing and you roll out, hey, I'll spend my evening, my afternoon doing whatever it is you want to do. But be willing to throw ideas people's way and say, well, have you ever thought about this? Or have you ever thought about that? And the more you give of yourself, this concept about being genuine and asking the right questions because you're actually trying to be helpful. It turns out if you're known as somebody who has good feedback and is willing to help people just because we want to help people, that puts you in a very good position long-term where people say, you're the kind of guy I want to surround myself with. It doesn't mean you have a specific skill that will fill a particular role that needs to already be filled, but more, do you have people around you who are giving of themselves and are genuinely interested in helping other people? That doesn't mean, oh, I want to invest in your company or, oh, I want to get paid for the next 15 minutes of advice. No, spend time and talk to people, get to know them, get to understand the challenges they have. And as a result of that, not only will you learn more about the people around you, but people will see you as a very positive, optimistic person. And that's very hard to fake. And if you really don't care about other people, then you need to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Because being an entrepreneur is not just about helping solve problems that you can sell to people. It's about surrounding yourself with other people who want to solve problems. And if they're successful, then we're all successful. Well, one of my greatest pleasures in life is hearing about a fellow entrepreneur who sold his or her business. And it's not just, oh, you got a big exit, but you built something that somebody else values enough that they would like to run it. And that's amazing. You built something that somebody else actually wants. Think about like selling at a bazaar and you've got a table of a bunch of stuff with a bunch of knickknacks and nobody wants to buy any of it. Well, chances are it's the same kind of thing when you're an entrepreneur and you're building ideas. When you actually have a bunch of cool ideas and you've operationalized them and there's a business there and you're solving problems for people and someone comes along and says, I want to buy this knickknack on your table. In some ways, that's very flattering because it means someone else also sees the value in what you created. It's very exciting. This concept, don't spend all your time just trying to climb the ladder yourself. Think about how do you create an environment where you're all helping each other. I know this sounds like bleeding heart, but it's not meant to sound that. Spend time, make sure you have time in your day to be open to helping others around you and to proactively go and look to say, what's challenging you? How is there anything I can do to help? Do you want to bounce ideas off of me? Oh, somebody says, I want your guidance. You know, when that 22-year-old says, I'd love to learn from you. Can I have coffee with you and learn some from you? Spend the time and do that because gosh darn it, the people along the way that have helped me give me context, I never understood how important that was until here I am on the other side realizing I should have spent more time talking to older, more experienced people to get that perspective.
Well, and fascinatingly, you never know who that 22-year-old dad is or uncle is or brother is. But
it doesn't really matter. I'm not talking to people because it might work out for me personally. Nope.
Okay.
Nope. There's positive juju in the world everywhere. And if you help other people, it will come back to help you. But even if it doesn't, the reality is people will look at you and say, he's not just a fierce bulldog who's trying to barrel through and become that self-made man. I have never met an entrepreneur who is a self-made man. It does not exist in my view. And what's the opposite of being a self-made man? It's you surrounded yourself with smart people that can give you feedback, that want to give you feedback, that are actively trying to help you better define a journey that makes sense, that will ultimately be successful. Being an entrepreneur and surrounding yourself with other like-minded people who are also trying to solve their own problems, that whether you call that networking, whether you call that camaraderie, like you have to have other people along in the journey with you. And it's not just because I want a piece of the business, of your business or whatever. It's like, no, I actually want to ultimately see others be successful. Because if others are successful, then it creates more incentive for more people to want to become entrepreneurs, to try to solve problems that the world hasn't solved yet.
Love it. So James, you're not one to toot your own horn. And a lot of times I ask this question at the very beginning of the podcast, but I'm going to ask it at the end and we're going to clip it into the beginning. Tell me in 60 seconds your journey. And I know a little bit of it. Ex-Amazonian. I know you started Prosper. I know you had a big agency that you ended up selling. And now you're involved in all sorts of different stuff. If I were to ask you, like, what's your journey look like in 60 seconds? Where did you go on that journey?
I went to college and thought I was going to become a university professor. And it didn't take long before I realized that wasn't going to make me happy. Writing research papers that nobody ultimately would care about or that didn't really help to solve the real world problems. I decided I didn't want to do that. I got a PhD, but it never was something that was ultimately going to be helpful in my corporate journey. I was in retail banking. I was in management consulting. I never really found those to be particularly personally rewarding. I ended up sort of by accident at Amazon. And it took about literally 2 days for me to realize, oh my gosh, this is the kind of situation I want to be in. Not forever, but at that point in my life, being surrounded by big questions, big growth opportunities, massive amounts of data that I could tap into. Very, very exciting and aligned well with what made me happy professionally. Yes, I ended up eventually leaving Amazon and working in an agency and starting a conference. But I have a very different journey now. I work with other entrepreneurs who are much earlier on in their development around building those businesses. And I don't help people with the Amazon part of their business anymore. I now help them with the overall part of how do you build a business? How do you avoid certain types of startup pitfalls? How do you make sure that you learn how to delegate work to other people and define what those jobs are for other people who want to be in a more traditional corporate role? That's all part of what I do now. And it's very rewarding because I don't necessarily get excited about selling whatever widgets that individual companies are selling. I'm more excited in the process of how do you build a company that's going to ultimately be successful. If you told me my 25-year-old version of myself, this is what I'd be doing now, I would have looked at you and said, that's crazy because nobody in my family's ever done anything like this. And that sounds like something where I'd have to learn a lot of stuff that I just don't naturally have around me. Yeah, that's true. But I also recognize that I'm very happy doing what I do now. And it's something that's worked out well for me. And for entrepreneurs or new to be people thinking about becoming entrepreneurs, ask yourself the question, can I deal with the uncertainties of being day-to-day of being an entrepreneur? Can I surround myself with other smart people who don't necessarily have all the answers, but are willing to give of themselves and to ask good questions? Those are the kinds of things you want to do. And even if every one of my business ideas didn't work out, I can look back fondly and say, look at all these really interesting people I worked with. And when the opportunity presents itself, I'd love to work with this person again or that person again. Even if they were never a business partner, they were smart people. And I want to introduce them to other smart people because again, I don't know where it's going to lead for them, but A players love to meet other A players and A players know lots of other A players. And so you make yourself an A player by surrounding yourself with other really good people, asking good questions and giving back of yourself. So that's the journey I would definitely wish upon others if they want to become successful entrepreneurs.
Love it. That wraps our episode. James, thank you so much for joining us on Monetizing Your Mental Capital. Love the focus we put on relationships and being genuine and those connections. Couldn't agree more. I think that's an embodiment of what you've done in your career in connecting me to many other people and the like. Thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Will. Take care.
Right.